The last thing we're going to do is write up an application that has us determine if a given number is even or not. So if we're going to do this, we first have to ask ourselves, how do we know if a number is odd or even? Well, you've been told for so long that a number is even if it's divisible by 2. Okay, yeah, that's true, but from a programming perspective, how can we determine if a number is divisible by 2? Well, what we can do is say if we have some number which we'll denote as x, it's even if the remainder of x divided by 2 is 0. So we need to use the remainder to determine if a number is divisible by 2. So if its remainder is 0, the number is even. So that means a number is odd if the remainder of x divided by 2 is 1, which means x is not divisible by 2. So if a number is not divisible by 2, the only possible remainder is 1. So how do we get the remainder again? Well, remember that we do have the mod operator, and that does calculate the remainder for us. Just like the percent sign does for Java, we have the mod operator for Visual Basic. So what this means is we can write an application that actually says, given some number, is this odd or even? We'll now do an example that uses at least some of the comparison stuff that we've been talking about. What we'll do here is we'll create a form where the user will enter a value in a text box and we'll have it display whether that number is odd or even. It's a pretty simple application. So we're in Visual Studio and we'll go ahead and create a new project. So make sure you select on New Project. I recommend following along to make sure you can actually do this on your own. So we'll go to New Project. And then we make sure we have Visual Basic, Windows Forms Application. And then under the name, I'm going to call this, we'll say Odd Even Application. You can call it whatever you want, but this is the name I'm going to give it. And we'll store at this location. That looks good. We'll click on OK. This may take a second or two to create the project. It says it is creating. All right, there we go. And the first thing we'll do is add the components to the form. So the first thing we need to do is to have the user enter an integer. So we're going to add a label. So we'll go down to label. Okay, and let's put a label right about here is good. And the text of this, we will say enter an integer. And let's make this a little bit bigger. So we'll change this to 12-point font. Let's go with 12, click OK. That looks pretty good. Maybe we'll move this back just a little bit. All right, that's pretty good. We'll now add a text box so the user can enter an integer. So we will put here's text box. And we're going to put this right here. Looks pretty good. And then we're going to call this, we need to change the name. So let's find the name. Okay, here we go. We'll call it TB, and I'll say num because we're going to enter some number in here. All right, that looks pretty good. And then we need to have some buttons for this. So let's add, let's see, we need a button that does the actual computation. So we'll go to button. And I'm going to put this down here. And we're going to call this, we'll say BT Calc. And then the name, or the text I should say, we're going to call this calculate. And then we'll increase the font to 12 point. All right, let's make the button a little bit bigger. That's pretty good. All right. And so the idea with this is we click on this button and we're going to get a display that actually says whether or not whether the number is odd or even. Now, instead of using a message box, we can actually do stuff with labels. So what I'm going to do is add another label to this form, and this is going to actually display our result. So I'm going to put this right about here. It's pretty good. So for we'll change the font to 12. And we don't have to worry about the initial text, because what we're going to do is initially make it not visible. And whenever we click on calculate, we will make it visible. So I'm going to change the name of this. Let's say we call this, we'll call it LB odd even. And then we need to find visible. No, it's around here somewhere. There it is, visible. And we're going to set it to false. That way when we initially run the program, we don't see this label right away. Okay. And then we're going to add a couple more buttons, kind of like what we did in one of our earlier examples a couple of lectures ago, where we would clear the contents and exit the form. So we're going to add 2 more buttons. So we're going to do 1, 2. Okay. Put 1 down here, put 1 over here. So this first one, we are going to make this the clear button. So we're going to say clear all. And what we'll have this do is clear the contents of the text box and make the label disappear. So we'll do that in just a bit, but we'll first change the font here to 12-point font again. Okay. Maybe I'll raise this a little bit and make the button a little bit bigger. That's a little big. Let's see if I can make it a little smaller. That's pretty good. And then we'll make this button. Oh yeah, I need to change the name of this button too. So let's go down here and change this to BT clear. Okay. So then this button, we're going to call it the exit button. So we'll call it BT exit for the name. And then our text, we're going to make it exit. So whenever we click on this, we'll exit the form. And then I'll make this 12-point font and then make this button a little bigger. That's pretty good. Okay, so we got the layout of the form. So now we got to do stuff with all this. So let's double click the exit one first and have our code appear, because this one's pretty simple. We're just going to do me.close to say if we click on the exit button that we would close the form. That one seems pretty simple. We'll do clear all next, because that one's also pretty simple. So the first thing we'll do is clear the text box. So we'll do tb_num.clear. So that will clear the text box. And then we need to set the visible property of our label to false. So we'll do lb odd even, there it is, dot visible equals false. All right. And now the bulk of our computation is going to be done with this calculate button. So what we need to do is determine if the value in our text box is odd or even, depending which one we want to pick. We would display in that label that it's odd or even, and then actually set the visible property to true. So what we'll do is we'll check to see if it's even. So we need to do an if-then statement. So we do if, and then our condition is going to be if the value of the text box is even or so. So that means we need to use the val method to get the number. So we'll use tb_num.text. So we take our string and convert it to a number. And to check to see if a number is even, we can use the mod operator. So we can check if this number mod 2 equals 0. So if the remainder of taking a number divided by 2 is 0, then it's an even number. So we'll do that, and then we'll say then. And then what we'll do is assign a string to our label. So we'll say lb odd even dot text. And what we're going to do is say that label is now going to be tb_num.text. And then we're going to concatenate the string is even. And notice that I put a space here. That way when we display the number, there is a space between the number and the word is. All right, so we'll do that if it's true. What if it's false? What if it's odd? Well, that means we need to make the label text say it's odd. So we'll do lb odd even.text equals tb_num.text. And then we concatenate is odd. And then the last thing we need to do in this sub procedure is to make the label visible. So we'll do lb odd even dot visible equals true. All right, that should be everything. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. All right, here is our form. We see that we're going to enter an integer. We have our text box. We have our calculate button, clear all, and exit. The other label here is not visible initially. So let's try this out. So maybe we do something like 34. And and we click calculate. 34 is even. So there we go. There's our label. Now I can click on clear all, and we see that our text box is cleared, and we see that the label is cleared. So let's do another example. Let's do 5. I'm going to do calculate. 5 is odd. That seems to work. Let's try a couple more examples. Maybe 0. Let's see what happens when we do 0. That sure enough works. 0 is even. Let's try a negative number. Negative 11. Negative 11 is odd. So sure enough, this does seem like it works. Let's make sure the exit button works. It should. There we go. And that's how we would write an application to check if a number is odd or even.